Okay, Vision. Oh, that one hot. All right, hey, Vision. Man, last time here at Hudson, we'll be doing that. It's been a great run, and this series has really been enjoyable. Like I've been saying many times, I've been looking forward to it all year because this concept of sowing and reaping, it's not just tied into church. It's not just tied into Christians. All of us, we have an opportunity in our lives in so many different ways to sow and to reap. If you missed any of the part of the series, let me kind of recap for you. Remember at the start, we talked about this concept of sowing and reaping, and we said that we all plant seeds with our words and with our deeds. So think about it. In your life, all the time, you are either cultivating your soil or you're putting toxins in it. In relationships, in your finances, in your health. And in fact, so who's been on this project, this health project, trying to lose some weight with us? Okay, I checked the scale this morning. I don't think it was reading right because it had gone back this direction. Now, granted, the last couple of days hadn't been to the gym or eating well. I guess that does it, right, Meredith? So evidently, the last couple of days I hadn't been sowing real well in my health. And also, I'm like, got this throat thing going, all that. So I'm like, man, I really hadn't. But the reality is in our life, we sow all the time with our words and with our deeds. The second week, we talked about 4 different soils. Remember, Jesus would gather and people come in for teaching. And I love it because you imagine there were like kids there too on the shore. And there are kids there where he'd go on the mountain. And all the kids are like, I don't know if we want to listen to this guy. And Jesus had this power to him where I think he would like look a little boy in the eyes. And you know how kids, they sometimes have some type of an innocence that hasn't been really damaged by life yet? I wonder if that kid would look and say, I'm looking in the eyes of the Son of God. And other people are sitting there in the crowd and they're like, oh, yeah, hey, Gage, give me some of that. This is my next door neighbor, Gage, right here. And and you wonder sometimes the adults, they're sitting there like one of these soils. And Jesus, he'd talk about casting the seed out. And maybe the seed would like fly over here and the word would go out. Person wouldn't get it. Like a bird come by to pick up the seed and it's gone. And Jesus would teach about the other soils. He'd say, there's rocky soil. And that was a tough one. He talked about tilling rocks out of our life. Rocks that get in the way of truly that seed getting in there and growing. And these kids are like, we're not worried about rocks. Just keep teaching us, Jesus. Keep teaching us. And then Jesus would teach some more about weeds. And kids especially, man, they don't have too many weeds in their life. We got weeds, right? We got pressure and stress, and we're hurried, and we look at stuff, we listen to stuff, we drink stuff. All these things get in us that are weeds. And Jesus is like, come on, get the weeds out so this can work. And the kids are still looking at him like, Jesus, what are you talking about? We just want to hear what you have to say. And he cast a seed into the fourth soil, which was good soil. And you think like little kids like Max would look, and he'd be like, yes, Jesus, I will learn to make the wise choice. I will trust God no matter what. And you didn't know it, but honestly, Jesus was talking basic truths back there on the side of a lake. And these kids would get it. But us as adults or teenagers, we'd be one of those 4 soils, and sometimes the word would bounce off, or there'd be rocks, or there'd be weeds, and sometimes it'd hit good soil. And Jesus would see it in someone's eyes. He'd see it in an eye, and he'd look and be like, okay, you're getting this, aren't you? And he'd see the seed getting in there, and he'd say, okay, you're getting it. But then remember, in week 3, we talked about crop failure. We talked about that there are things in our life that limit the crops, the harvest from coming. And God speaks to us. He says, look, I've got so much power I want to give you. Don't let these crop failures get in the way. These things like unbelief. Let's be real. Does anybody here ever sometimes struggle to believe God, that he's really going to do what he says he's going to do? Like, I'm with you, Tosh, Stace, Chris. I'm with you on that. Sometimes our unbelief is a limiting factor. Then there's impatience. Now, okay, I know no one is in here is impatient. Do you know anybody who's impatient? You do. Sean's like, I know bunches of them. Yes. And a lot of times God just says to us, look, your impatience is limiting my work. And he said, limit God's work. He's all-powerful. He is all-powerful, and you can limit his work, and especially that impatience during stalk time. So say stalk time. Because I was in some conversations this week, and some people, they were in that season where they're waiting for God to do something. They said, yeah, Pastor Matt, it's stalk time. And if you missed that, we were talking about sunflowers and how they pop out of the ground, but there's a whole lot of time where that stalk's got to grow before you see any harvest up there. So in that stalk time, don't get impatient and limit or ruin God's work. Then we talked about, a tough one was unconfessed sin. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, I got some of those. I just don't want you to know about them. I don't want to talk about them. I don't want them on the screen. I don't want anybody to know. let me tell you this. Don't miss this. Satan will do everything he can for you to keep your unconfessed sin hidden, that you don't tell anybody, you don't get anybody praying for you, helping you. Make sure you don't let unconfessed sin be the crop failure that is limiting you. And you're saying, hey, I'm studying the Word. Hey, I'm trying to do things in my life to see God work. It's not happening. Why is it not happening? And God says it's because you have unconfessed sin in your life. And we talked about confessing it, remember, speaking it, and then turning from it, repenting. And we do that, then we get really down to that last piece of crop failure. I talked about words. Now, it was funny because I was in a conversation this week, and somebody said, oh, with my luck, they're like, they kind of caught themselves. Remember last week I said, don't you talk about the only kind of luck you've got is bad luck. Because you don't. You're following Jesus Christ. I wouldn't call it luck. I tell you got favor. I tell you got blessing. You got the Almighty God on your side. And so don't you speak things like, the devil made me do it. Don't you give him any credit or any power in your life. As you take those pieces of crop failure, you're going to see harvest. It's like, man, why isn't this working? Crop failure. Get those things out. So today, we're going to talk about harvest. Because I love the concept of harvest. Now, the only time I don't like harvest is when we go to get square bales. Okay, has anybody here ever gotten in hay? Yeah, okay. This is hard work. This is hard work, especially if it's that harvest somewhere in like the hot time of the year. When you go out there to get hay, and you know that cute lady who runs Bit of Hope Ranch calls you, and she's like, "Can you get in some hay for me?" And I'm calling guys like Scott and Stacy and Michael, like, "Can you guys come help us get in hay?" And basically, it's harvest time, which is a good thing, except when you're going to get 300 or 400 square bales, and it's it's flying all over, and you toss it in the barn, and you're getting all dusty, and it's all over, and you're like, "Oh, this is the worst thing in the world." But if you got to feed animals, harvest time is a great time. So we talk about harvest today. I want you to realize you have the chance to have harvest in your life. And that excites me because I don't want to live a life that doesn't have harvest. Now, I want you to pick up this phrase that I heard recently. It talks about sowing and reaping in regard to harvest. And this is where the calculus comes in. So, okay, again, do we have any calculus experts or kind of knowledgeable, or you know it at all, or you kind of can do it? Because I cannot. Calculus and organic chemistry ruined my life, okay? So those two things I will never lean on personally. But when God uses calculus, you're like, no, wait, God can't use calculus. Now think about this. When you are sowing by faith, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in your health, whether it's in your finances, when you are sowing by faith, you are doing simple math. God says, look, it's simple, simple, simple. Trust me. So when you expect God to work in return, God is doing calculus. In fact, sometimes lately we've called it God's math. God's math. We were at a meeting a couple weeks ago, and again, Keith, I've been spending just about as much time with Keith as I have my wife lately. So that's why I'm quoting Keith so much. But with Keith, he stood up and he said, guys, look, we've been paying this much in rent for this much space, and we're going to pay this much in rent for this much space. He said, that doesn't make sense. He said, that's God's math. So I want you to understand that when you trust God and you sow into your health, into your finances, into relationship, into your dealing with stress, and you say, okay, God, I'm doing the simple things you told me to do, God says that's simple math. And then when you see God work in a way where it's unexplainable, and people said, how has that happened in your life? How did you get somebody to give you months away from work and pay you to take leave when your health is bad? That's a true story I just heard yesterday. That is God's math. That is God doing calculus in harvest. So why don't you think about this? In John 12:24, Jesus said, very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. So say it dies. And say it produces seeds. You're like, well, that doesn't make sense. If something dies, how does it produce seed? You understand, when you take a seed and put it in the ground, lock in on this, because this is you when you're sowing. This is you when you're going through something. You take that seed and put it in the ground, you're not putting it in a grave, you're putting it in a garden. Okay, I need you to get that. When you're struggling, saying, God, I can't believe the season I'm going through, and God says, it's stalk time, we're trying to grow you, and you say, God, I sure feel like I'm in a grave. I want you to understand, you're in a garden. if you will see it that way. Now, Jesus was talking about this for you, but people didn't know it at that time. He was talking about death and resurrection, and they had no idea he was talking about himself. I'm going to come back to that. The other verse I want you to think about is in Hebrews 12. It talks about discipline. Now, Tina, you work with kids all the time. Discipline gets challenging, doesn't it? Tina's like, Lord, Pastor Matt, if you knew. Okay, so say discipline. Okay, now I need you to say discipline with a smile. Discipline. We're like, I don't like discipline. I don't want to eat with discipline. I don't want to exercise with discipline. I don't want to manage my money with discipline. I don't want to manage my mouth with discipline. And Hebrews 12 says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. You're like, amen to that. Later on, however, it produces something. It produces what? What's the word? It produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained up by it. So I want you to understand, when you buy into the process of sowing and reaping toward harvest, it takes discipline. And when you have discipline mixed in with God's power, you will experience a harvest. That encourages me. So some examples of harvest. Because I pray for you guys and think about how I know so many stories in our church. I think about, for example, single people in our church. Was anybody in here ever single? If you're not raising your hand, you're sleeping. So I don't know if you remember what it feels like to be single, either as a teenager, because our teenagers, some of them are struggling, as maybe someone who's single again, maybe someone who's been divorced or cheated on, somebody who is in a spot in life where they are not married and they want to find that mate, and the world is screaming stuff at them about how to find that person, and God whispers to them, don't listen to that. God says, what you sow, you're going to reap. Excuse me. He says, if you're single and you have discipline, you will reap a harvest of righteousness and peace. So I encourage you, if you're single, no matter what age you are, and you're like, Pastor Matt, I'm not looking to get married yet. That's okay. That's okay. But you listen to me and you listen to your mama. Okay? Because your mama is going into her prayer closet and she is talking to God for her 3 boys. Okay? She's doing that. How about in your health? You're like, Pastor Matt, I'm trying to get healthier. I want to have more energy. I want to have clearer mind. The discipline on the front end, particularly of walking with somebody. Where's Tammy? Like me and Tammy, but like through Facebook, we've been walking together in this, saying, hey, we're getting healthier. Tasha back there, we're doing this. I think, who was Tommy Jones? We're like, hey, we're trying to get healthier. So we are sowing into something. It takes discipline because we believe there's going to be a harvest. There is, if we will buy into that process. Okay, how about your finances? Everybody's like, oh, man, Pastor Matt, if you knew my finances. God knows your finances, and don't you miss this. God doesn't want you toiling through life in your financial world. He wants you to experience blessing. You're like, oh, here we go again, the prosperity gospel. Absolutely. Because I don't want you living in the bankruptcy gospel, the frustration gospel. I don't. If you don't believe me, then you look at Deuteronomy 28, and you read in there, God says, obey, follow his commands, you'll experience abundant prosperity. I said, I don't understand that. I want to live my life that people look at me and say, man, how can you be so generous? How can you live a life where you just take care of people? You choose to sow into what God says to sow into, you will reap what he says you'll reap. That's tithing in your church. I see Chris back there doing this. He's seen it. My brother Chris was down at that conference in South Carolina. Woo, man, I know some people he heard this week were preaching this with power about the fact that if you trust God, you will see abundant blessing in your life financially. You'll see it. The last area that I want to talk about is in relationships. So I guarantee almost everybody in here has someone in their life that you're trying to sow into so the relationship gets better. It's your kid. It's your ex. It's somebody at work. It's your boss. And you're praying and say, God, I want to get better. And you're tired. And God says, keep sowing. You will reap some type of harvest if you are faithful. So I promise you, this system toward harvest, it works. Psalm 126, you could probably relate to this. It says, those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. So say weeping, say joy. Okay, say weeping, say joy. Okay, I want joy. But we need to understand, sometimes there takes weeping to get to joy. When you're like, God, I don't know if I can endure this person one more day, and you're either physically or in your heart you're weeping, God says, I see that. I'm going to honor that. You're saying, God, I don't know if I can give toward that. I don't know if I can pass on eating that, or I can do that exercise. And God says, weep and struggle in that. You will make it. You will have joy. I'm telling you, this is God's word. It's true. And then Galatians 6:9 says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. So I want to encourage you. As we wrap up this series today, I want you to walk away from this in your mind thinking, okay, God, where am I going to see you work some miracles? Where am I literally going to see a victory? Don't give up. As you take care of your boys and you try to turn this into a career and you find your vision, God's vision for your life, don't get weary and give up, because you will reap that harvest if you don't give up. Now, okay, I need to ask you this, and I'll be impressed if anybody knows this answer. Okay, I got a picture to put up. I want to know if anybody knows who this first guy is. He's a baseball player. He played a long time in baseball. He hit a lot of home runs. Tons of home runs. Hundreds of home runs. In fact, he is the all-time home run king in the minor leagues. In fact, if anybody knows that, I'll say either you're really smart or you spend too much time on Wikipedia. His name is Mike Hessman. He is the all-time leader in home runs in the minor leagues. That's pretty impressive. I mean, you think about the people in this world who've ever tried to play baseball and have ascended to the level of single A, double A, triple A. Those are great baseball players. He has hit more home runs than anybody in that level. Okay, now this next picture. See if you know who this guy is. Who's that? Who's that? It's Hank Aaron. Does anybody know who Hank Aaron is? You even heard of Hank Aaron? A little bit of Hank Aaron. Okay, now I do need to preface this because Barry Bonds ain't no record holder. Okay? You can judge me if you want, but Barry Bonds, if you know anything about him, he cheated his way into becoming the all-time home run leader. I'm just saying, he, in my mind, is not the all-time home run record leader. Hank Aaron is. This man hit 755 home runs in the major leagues. Then take a look at the next picture. He played in places like Fulton County Stadium with 60, 70, 80,000 people watching, millions on TV watching. Now, the other guy, Mike Hessman, never had, let's go one more picture. Mike never had a picture like this where the whole world was watching and Hank Aaron hit number 715. And he rounded the bases, people taking pictures, watching, and then, of course, he went all the way to 755, and he retired as the all-time leader in home runs in Major League Baseball. So I want you to lock in on this. You can live your spiritual life in the minor leagues, or you could take a chance and go in the major leagues. You can kind of trickle along your whole life, not really sowing, not really believing the principles of God. Maybe trying your Bible every once in a while. Maybe trying church every once in a while, or worship every once in a while, or give something every once in a while. You kind of trickle along, and people may even get to the end of life and be like, Freddie, oh man, he spent the last 40 years of his life in church. He took his family to church. And someone may say that about you, that, man, that was a kind of a good church-y person. That was a person who carried around a Bible or had a Bible or maybe used to know their Bible or something about the Bible. And they look at you, and really you've got a shallow. Remember Jesus was talking about shallow? The rocky ground, the weed-filled ground. And they'd say, wow, that person hit so many home runs in the minor leagues. And that's okay. That is okay. Or you can let God get into your story in a way where you start seeing him work, and people are like, wow, I see God doing something in your life. What is going on? Would you tell me? And you say, hey, we are sowing into so many different areas, and God is helping us reap in so many areas that it is unstoppable what we're seeing him do. And people say, wow, there's something different about them. Our church is in the same season where I feel like for 5 years, we've done some good things. We have. I'm not discounting at all that we've baptized 125 people. We have blessed the community in so many ways, blessed the world in so many ways. We have seen God work, and I think God's saying to us, are you ready to go to the big leagues? And it's not about acreage or square footage. It's about a mentality. And we're going to move, and we're going to face opposition, and we're going to have trials and troubles, and some people walk in and say, I don't want to be a part of this, and they'll walk right out, and that is okay. Because I'm going to keep walking. And I'm going to head toward a mountain. And I'll tell you this. I'm not trying to climb the mountain. I'm not trying to dissolve the mountain because God is the one who moves mountains. And if you want to be a part of living with a God who moves mountains, you'll be living in the major leagues. So here's my last story. Okay, who in here likes apples? Remember we talked about apples? Okay, who in here likes apple pie? Now let me some apple pie. Tammy, there's no guilt even just talking about apple pie. We're good talking about it. We just can't be eating it right now. You need donut, yeah. Okay, so I got an apple. So, man, let me say apple. Okay. So you guys here on the floor, you see this apple? See this apple? I want you to imagine, maybe 100 years ago, let's say, that there was a man and a woman, maybe who lived in a small town in North Carolina, and they came across one apple. Remember a couple weeks ago, we were talking about apples, and you open them up, there's seeds inside. And, you can eat that apple, and it produced one apple. And that's fine. It did fine. But if you take that seed, and if you plant it in good soil, not on the path, not in the rocky soil, not in the weed-filled soil, but in good soil, you plant that seed in the soil. Let's say this old man, this old woman, they're sitting on the back of his truck, and they're thinking back, saying, babe, you remember we planted that first seed, and they planted that seed. And it, let's see what it did. It produced, what's the next picture? Bushels of apples. Now, hey, that's good news. Imagine them sitting there on the back of their truck, their old Chevy, and they're looking out on this, I'm going to call it like the Apple Festival. You're like, the Apple Festival? How do you get from that to the Apple Festival? They planted that. They had a bushel come up. And then what's the next picture? They said, actually, we want more than a bushel, so let's plant those seeds with the expectation it's going to grow trees. And they're kind of reminiscing. They're an older couple. They're talking, reminiscing about planting seeds and seeing trees of apples come up, which lead to the next picture, which is like countless numbers of apples. And so you imagine, actually, Meg, come stand here with me so you can picture this better. Meg's like, you didn't tell me I'd come up there. I didn't do my hair. Your hair looks great, baby. It looks great. All right, so take a spot right here. So imagine 100 years ago, a couple sitting there on the back of their truck. They're like, I don't know, 75 years old, just holding an apple, talking about apple, reminiscing back to when they planted some seeds. And from those seeds came trees. And from those trees came bushels and bushels and cartloads and truckloads of apples. And from those, then, they passed them out to people, and some people kept them as apples, and some people made apple pie, and some people made caramel-covered apples, and some people made, whatever else you make with apples. I mean, they had all different kind of apples to where now they're having the Apple Festival. And they're sitting there, not doing anything, just sitting on the back of their truck, watching. All of these people blessed because of their apple seeds. Not having to lift a finger, not having to toil, but they believed in the process of sowing and reaping. And this whole festival's going on, kids are playing, and you guys eating caramel-covered apples, loving it, not having any idea that it all trailed back to a couple faithful people that planted some seeds. And I need you to get in your mind, as we wrap up this series, that you have the potential to sow and reap abundance. You know best in what area of your life. You and God go and talk about that. But I want you to get to a spot in your life where you're looking back and seeing how God has worked miraculously. Remember, calculus, God math. We're sitting there watching the Apple Festival. We're like, we couldn't have dug up all these apples. God did this. This is God's math. And imagine the contentment of sitting there, seeing all these people experiencing happiness and joy and full bellies because you sowed and they got to reap. So what I'd like to do is you guys check out, this is kind of like our 5-year wrap-up video. I got a couple words to close us, and then we'll go on a journey. All right, so if you guys got that video, roll it.
Sometimes the night was beautiful. Sometimes the sky was so far away. Sometimes it seemed to stoop so close. You could touch it, but your heart would break. Sometimes the morning came too soon. Sometimes the day could be so hot. There was so much work left to do, but so much you'd already done. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. And I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. Sometimes I think of Abraham, how one star he saw had been lit for me. He was a stranger in this land, and I am that no less than he. And on this road to righteousness, sometimes the climb can be so steep. I may falter in my steps, but never beyond your reach. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. and I will learn to walk in your ways. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. Sometimes the night is beautiful, and I will follow you all of my days. Sometimes the night is beautiful, and I will follow you all of my days. Sometimes the night is beautiful, and I will follow you all of my and I will follow you all of my and I will follow you all of my
Oh God, you are my God.
follow you all of my
Oh God, you are my Sometimes the night
and I will follow you all of my
All right. Well, as your pastor, I commit to giving my best. I will. And as we land this plane, in that verse from Jesus where he talks about a kernel that has to die, he wasn't just talking about a seed that you sow and a seed that you reap. He was talking about himself. And they didn't get that day. Those kids didn't understand it that day when he talked about the fact that truly for a seed to have its power, it has to die. Remember, it's not just a grave, it's a garden. And Jesus took his body and allowed it. Remember, nobody forced him to do anything. He chose to go in what we thought was a grave, and instead it was a garden. Because he was the ultimate seed, the incorruptible seed, going in the ground and saying, I'll come out of this thing for you. For you. You see Drew Crisp on that thing, and he's like, the water falling off your arms. Brother, I love that video clip. Because Jesus did that for you. And so make sure, number one, you understand that in your life. And number two, the rest of your life is dedicated to helping other people understand that. That's all that matters.